and pretend I'm going to use some milk this morning. I probably won't, so there we go. It's different, If I was to ask you, if you knew what we've been going through for the last 2 weeks, would anybody have any clue? Yeah, one bit of preaching now, otherwise no bit of preaching. Alright, we've been looking at John's Gospel, and we've been looking at the I ams of Jesus. And there are actually 7 I ams of Jesus, but we've been looking at 6 of them, because last week we amalgamated 2 together. I am the door of the sheep, and I am the good shepherd, and we put those 2 together. And one of the things you might know about John's Gospel, or you might not know about John's Gospel, John is the 4th Gospel in the Bible, and 90% of what John records is not written anywhere else. The Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark and Luke, they have a common source. Probably Peter, but it might not have been Peter, but it was stories that have been handed down and then were written as the Gospel. And John's Gospel was the last Gospel to be written. It was written back between 885 and 95 AD. And it was the last Gospel to be written. And there are certain things in John's Gospel that are particular, certain words that come out that are there for a particular purpose. One of the words that John often uses is the word believe. He uses it 98 times throughout the Gospel. The fact is that within the New Testament, that word is used just short of 300 times. A third of them appear in John's Gospel. The other word that he uses a lot is life, or live. And again, it's particular and peculiar to John, and he uses it 56 times, and often they are together. And the reason why John wrote this Gospel was that people would believe 98 times, and that they would live 56 times. And this word life, or live, is in Greek, there are a number of words for life, and there are 3 particular words, and this word is the word zoe. So if you know something called zoe, that's what that means, life. Somebody that's called zoe usually has life. And it's not just any sort of life, it's actually eternal life that John is talking about. It's God-given life. And so he's wanting people to believe, and he's wanting people to have life. And at the beginning of John's Gospel, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God, and without him was not anything made that was made. And then it says, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. And then when we get to the end of John's Gospel, when he's saying in John 20 about why this Gospel is written, he says many books might have been written about all that Jesus did. In fact, he said, I don't think the world could contain, there wouldn't be enough room, there wouldn't be enough pages to say all that Jesus did. And then he said, but these things I have written down, that you might believe, and that you might have life in his name. That's why John wrote his Gospel. That we might believe, and that we might have life. And not just any sort of life, but we might have new life, eternal life. You see, life, there are numerous types of life, but what John is talking about is eternal life, spiritual life. Now this morning, we're all alive. I can see that. Some might be asleep, or on the border of it, but you're alive. But that's physical life. But there is within us something else, isn't there? there is a spiritual side. And that spiritual side needs to be awakened. It might be the physical side that needs to be awakened as well this morning. You know, as we go further on, you might get drowsy, you might go to sleep. But we need to be awakened spiritually. There's a spiritual side that needs to be awakened. And that's what John is talking about. He wants people to wake up to the fact that Jesus is the Messiah. That he is the only one that can actually give life. You might look for life in many places. But Jesus is the only one that can actually give true, new life. Regenerate life. And that's what John is talking about. You see, and in this, it's the 11th chapter of John, Jesus is confronted with the fact of sickness and the fact of death. You read at the start that now Lazarus was sick. He was the brother of Mary and Martha, and it says that Jesus loved Lazarus, and he was sick. And there are one or two things that are sort of curious about this next few verses that we need to read it. It says that so Mary and Martha said to Jesus and said, Lord, he whom you love is sick. And that you expected, wouldn't you? That if Jesus heard that he would put his faith about as quickly as he could to see Lazarus. Yeah? The healing power of God. And we read that he waited 4 days before he left. He waited. And it's sort of one of those anomalies, isn't it? Why did Jesus not come immediately? Well, Tim was saying there that you've been reading a book, right? Now things are not just always going how we plan. Often we say the Lord's Prayer. Probably one of the things we omit in our church services for you to look at, we don't often say it. But we don't often say the Lord's Prayer. But in the Lord's Prayer, we say, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. But often when we're praying, or I'm praying, what we always say, we don't say, Lord, thy will be done. We often say, Lord, my will be done. You know, we just have that slight blip. And we want God to do what we want him to do. We want him to be at our beck and our call. And Jesus will remain with us. And somehow, we don't always understand why God doesn't come through when we want him to. Just in our house group this last week, we were talking, and one of our members lost a son when he was 16. And he said, well, it was right there when it happened, it crashed the motorway. And he said, I cried out to God. And I still don't understand it. And this kind of glory, I don't think we always understand why things happen. And I don't think this side of glory, I don't think we'll ever understand some of the things that happen. And yet, Jesus remained 4 days. And he said, this sickness isn't unto death, but it is that the Father might be glorified, or that we give glory to the Father. And so he remained, and then we read that he moved from where he was and he went to Bethany. And as he approached Bethany, Mary came to him, or Martha came to the mission. And she said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And then she said, But I believe that whatever you say, God will do. Now, she wasn't expecting Jesus to raise Lazarus from the dead. That's evident from what happens subsequently in the account. She wasn't expecting that to happen. But she said, even though you didn't come when I anticipated it, you know what? I still believe that you're in control, that you have that plan, that you are the Christ, that you are the Son of God. And sometimes, our faith is tested, isn't it? By what we don't see happening. It's not what we do see happening, sometimes it's what we don't see happening that proves our faith. And her faith in Jesus was still strong, even though he hadn't come running at her beck and call. And even though Lazarus had died, her faith was still strong. She knew who Jesus was. It's similar to the account in Daniel. In Daniel and Shadrach and Abednego were thrown into the furnace of fire, and they stored the fire up as opposite them. And then they threw these three men into the fire. But before they were thrown into the fire, they said to the king said to these three men, renounce your God and bow down and worship the image that I've set up. And they said, we believe that our God can deliver us from the fire. But if not, we will not bow down and serve your God. We will still be faithful. And that's sometimes how we have to take it, isn't it? It's sometimes very right. And that's where Mary and both Martha were. They believed in God, even though the circumstances were not going how they thought they should. Even though they felt that Jesus hadn't come at the opportune time, they still believed that he was the Christ, that he was the Messiah. And we are, as a church, as individuals, confronted by sickness and by death at all times. I mean, that's how it is, isn't it? A few weeks ago I was talking to a friend and I was just saying that I was struggling with a bit of a relationship issue with the next generation. And this can happen. And she said, I know what's wrong with you. And it's the same problem that my husband's got. And I said, all right, can you tell me what it is? She said, yeah, it's called man syndrome. And some of them have it. Some of you don't have it yet. They're called old man syndrome. And the husband said, yeah, it's been diagnosed, or they're diagnosed it as AGE. And that's what we're faced with. But Jesus was talking not about age, he was talking about life. And he said, life is what he came to give. John 10:10, I came that you might have life, and you might have it in all its fullness. He wants to give us a full life. And so here in John chapter 11, we have these incredible words that Jesus said in 11:25. He said, behold, I am the resurrection and the life. In other words, there is no life outside with Jesus Christ. There is no life outside of him. And it was a declaration, but it was also, it became a demonstration. Because when he went to the tomb, and he stood outside of the tomb, and he said, roll back the stone, and both the sisters said, Lord, by this time, he stinks, or there is a smell. He's already in the process of decay. And when sometimes, God looks at our lives, and the stone is rolled back, and there's actually a stink about what's going on in our lives. And a brother-in-law, and the brother-in-law, he used to manage a football team. And his team weren't playing that well. In fact, they were losing quite a few matches, and he was the manager, and he was player manager at the time. And so at half-time, he got his team together, and he said, I'll tell you what once, quite direct, he said, your attitude stinks. What's that good? And sometimes, as the story goes back from our lives, the attitude stinks. There's stuff going on there that is deeply dead. And Jesus wants to speak the word of life into those areas. And it's the resurrection of the life. He can bring new life into those areas that are at the moment are dead and decayed. And that actually there is a stench of that. And God is the only one in Christ that can bring new life. See, that's what John was trying to get across from the very first thing. He said, these things are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, that he is the only one, and that by believing, you might have life. You might have this new life. In John 3, Nicodemus came to Jesus, and he came by night. And Jesus said to Nicodemus, Nicodemus, you need to be born again. It's the old phrase, we hear it all the time, don't we? Oh, it's born again Christians. Well, it's right. Because to have a new life, we need to have a new birth. To have a spiritual life, we need to have a spiritual birth. The life that John is talking about is spiritual. It's not the carnal life. It's not the life that you live at the moment, perhaps. But it's the life that comes from above. It's the life that God gives through Christ. He is the resurrection of God. He is the only life. What John is reiterating is what he says at the very beginning of the Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And without him, there's not anything there that was made. That means that everything that is life has its basis in Jesus. And we need to come to Jesus about life. Now this morning, time is gone, but this morning, there are some that might not have experienced that moment, that might not have asked Jesus to be their Saviour, that might not have experienced that new birth that he was talking about to Nicodemus. And some might say, Lord, I don't understand what's going on in my life at the moment. I've asked you to come alongside, and somehow you're just not been there. But this morning, even though I don't sense you, I want to be like Mary, and I want to be like Martha, and I want to say, Lord, whatever you say, I still trust you. Whatever happens, I still trust you. you are still my brother. As the Christian. And as we don't have communion now, but as we go to communion, as you take the elements this morning, and just to let you know that the wine that we use is non-alcoholic, so there's no sugar and all that, if there's an issue there. But as you take the bread, and as you take the wine, I want you to ask that this life that Jesus brought is so Lord, as I take this blood, this cup, I just trust you with my life. I just ask that you give me a new life that is in Christ. And that as I take the bread, the Lord, I just pray that the bread will become for me personally, the body of Jesus, the new life, the reference, the sustaining life. If we read from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, where it says,